It is episode 130 of Decoding Fox News, and I'm your host, Juliette Jeske. Each week, I watch and analyze a whole heck of a lot of Fox News and then break it down. I watch all the Fox News you'd never want to. Let's get into it. According to Fox, Kamala Harris is a flip-flopping, fading fabulist.
The hiding Harris strategy protects the VP from her epic list of flip-flops, the latest being this 180 on banning plastic straws.
If you don't take positions on stupid things like plastic straws, you don't have to walk them back, ban plastic straws.
This flip-flop with the straws is, again, one of the...
And there she is in Detroit. She changed her accent when she was there, and that similar accent, and so she did the same. A different accent. So this is the...
Kamala is pulling out all this stop with an old Democrat classic, the fake accent.
She'll even change her accent.
Since when does the vice president have what sounds like a Southern accent?
I'm offended by Kamala's Southern accent. Peter Doocy should ask his first question tomorrow with a Southern accent.
Harris's record on fracking.
She doesn't want to have any fracking.
Vice President Harris over her changing stance on fracking. Will voters be able to overlook her fracking flip-flop?
That she was against fracking.
Fracking. There will be no fracking. There will be no fracking.
When it comes to fracking, she changed her mind, according to Surrogate.
Kamala Harris about fracking.
Whose lives depend on fracking.
She's not in favor of banning fracking anymore.
Kamala Harris changed her mind on fracking.
Last week on Fox, the network had to cobble together multiple grievances to attack Kamala Harris. She was fading in the polls. Her accent changed at a speech, and she flip-flopped on fracking and plastic straws. How dare anyone question Americans' right to suck down 80 ounces of a highly sweetened, artificially colored and flavored beverage through a polypropylene hollow tube? What is freedom without plastic straws? While Fox was worked up about Kamala Harris's stance on beverage accessories, Donald J. Trump held a press conference about a civil case where a jury found him liable of sexually assaulting columnist E. Jean Carroll in a department store dressing room. The network's glorious leader could cheat on all three of his wives, file for bankruptcy multiple times, steal confidential documents, stiff contractors, lie about the 2020 election, impersonate his own publicist. No, really. Cost Fox $787.5 million, compare migrants to animals, mock deceased veterans, and sit in the White House dining room while the U.S. Capitol was sacked. And Fox News was still going to bash Kamala over her changing stance on plastic straws. No, really. That's what happened. Anyone exclusively watching Fox News last week might not realize that hundreds of thousands of Israelis protested their own government's policies regarding the conflict with Hamas. The Earth recorded the hottest summer on record, and a former Trump campaign official was indicted by the Department of Justice for work he did for a Russian media company. Shows I covered on Fox last week: Fox and Friends, The Five, Jesse Watters Primetime, Hannity, Wednesday and Thursdays for the Trump Town Hall. Before I get to this, I should add my commercial now, very quickly. If you're wondering who supports Decoding Fox News, who pays my bills, is it somebody from Russia giving me millions of dollars? Oh, hell no. Decoding Fox News is paid for 100% by the listeners of this podcast and readers of my newsletter. The newsletter being the written version of this podcast, complete with hyperlinks. If you'd like to become a supporter of Decoding Fox News, you go to my Substack channel for Decoding Fox News or my Patreon account for Decoding Fox News. All paid supporters, paid subscribers get exclusive content. This week, it will be analysis of chapters 6 and 7 of Project 2025. It's almost finished. I just got to put it up, edit it, that whole 9 yards. So thank you so much. Moving on, Kamala Harris, much to do about nothing. Last week, the folks at Fox were really scraping the bottom of the barrels in search of something horrible they could say about Kamala Harris. Yes, she changed her mind about plastic straws. The term plastic straws showed up 6 times in the transcripts last week. In 2019, during a climate change-themed marathon town hall on CNN, Kamala Harris was asked if she would support a ban on plastic straws. She said, "I think we should, yes." Then she said, "Look, I'm going to be honest. It's really difficult to drink out of a paper straw." And she sort of made a joke out of it. Now, the Biden-Harris administration had no policy on plastic straws. They did not write legislation or push for a ban on plastic straws. But Fox News took that comment to mean she wanted to ban plastic straws and ran with it. They went nuts with that. Next up, we have Kamala Harris slightly changed her voice. Another pressing issue for Fox News hosts was the issue of Kamala's regional dialect, which they referred to as an accent. Technically, if it's in the same country, you're supposed to say dialect. So Southern dialect, Western dialect, but people don't. They just say accent. Accent's supposed to be used for another country. So German accent, British accent, French accent. Anyway, the American lexicon is exciting and constantly changing, and accent is used instead. Regardless, so she did a speech in Detroit. She had a slight tone change in her voice, and everybody on Fox lost their minds. So many black pundits and journalists defended Harris. I found a great column by Brian Broom in the Washington Post, an op-ed that he wrote about this, and he started it with this phrase: I do not talk the same way in front of my White House friends as I do my black friends. I don't care how long I've known the white person. I don't care how close I am to them. I do not use the same language or the same inflections, patterns, or even vocalizations that I do with my black friends and family. Harris's slightly changing dialect is a great example of what linguists refer to as code switching. So this is something they actually teach people who do public speaking and sales, anything where you have to deal a lot with the public. Code switching is an actual technique. It's when a speaker alternates between two or more languages or language varieties in the context of a single conversation or situation. So what she was doing was code switching to a black audience. This is normal. They called it a Southern accent. I would say that it was not. So next up, we have Harris changed her record on fracking. So during that same CNN marathon climate change town hall, Harris said that she would ban fracking when she was asked a very leading question from an activist who called it like this horrific practice. Now, of course, there was no policy as part of the Biden-Harris administration to ban fracking, none whatsoever. There's no legislation introduced to ban fracking, no movement whatsoever. The practice of fracking is used to extract around 75% of the oil extracted in the United States. So crude oil, most companies that extract it from the oil use fracking because any of the oil that we could have gotten from drilling mostly has been tapped out. Fracking is a controversial process. There are many people who are still very much against it. It has apparently gotten safer and a little bit easier on the environment, but is still very controversial, and a lot of environmentalists are against it. However, it has gotten more prevalent since Biden took office, not less. So there's your evidence on her quote-unquote banning fracking. And then finally, and the term fracking, by the way, was used 57 times in the transcript from last week. And they kept discussing it during Trump's town hall with Hannity. It just kept coming up over and over again. Like they would just talk about it for no reason. Like, oh, we're going to talk about fracking because it was in Pennsylvania. And the idea was to scare the heck out of everybody. Another thing they sort of pulled from thin air was everybody on Fox decided at once that Kamala was tanking in the polls. And this is not true. There was a slight dip, but if you look at 538, she's doing great. Her approval rating has gone way up. Trump's has not. In the popular vote, she's still beating Trump on 538. But everybody on Fox was like, no, all the enthusiasm for her has died. Everybody hates her. It's all over. I'm not kidding. So I cobbled together this little montage from various Fox shows of them promoting this. And this starts on Tuesday on The 5 with Jesse Waters openly bragging that he doesn't really care about reality. Here we go.
Honestly, Judge, I only look at the stuff that makes me think Trump's going to win.
Has Kamala Harris reached her limit?
Well, maybe not her limit, but I do think that in the last 2 weeks, she is losing airspeed and altitude. And as I said yesterday, losing airspeed and altitude. Actually, this morning, I was like, I'm bored. Why am I bored?
Interesting.
Like, all the vibes and the sugar highs are gone.
Mm-hmm.
Where's the nutrition? We need some nutrition. There's nothing on the table to eat, and now we have to wait another 5 days.
As of now, she's lost her momentum because the manufactured enthusiasm evaporated once voters evaluated her without the pomp and pageantry. It's fading. She's fading. Her numbers are fading. She peaked in August. Everybody knows it. Nate Silver now gives Donald Trump a 62% chance of winning the Electoral College. I don't care how much money she raises.
Silver's mad about his convention.
I don't care how much money she raises. Hillary raised twice as much as Trump, and he smoked her. Kamala Harris campaign, which is losing momentum fast.
Now, I don't know why, but everybody basically because Nate Silver, who's working for a company that's owned by Peter Thiel backed J.D. Vance. So let's just put those together. Now, everybody on Fox News claims that Nate Silver is like the expert, the end-all of polling, and they're calling him a Democrat, which I don't know if he's a Democrat or not. He's certainly never worked for the Democratic Party. But they've decided he's the end-all be-all of polling. He knows, he's got the tea leaves, Trump's going to win. Now, what's funny about this is Nate Silver did do a great job in 2012 predicting the winner of that election. However, in 2016, I think it's safe to argue that the entire polling industry kind of collapsed because they were all off. Almost everyone, every expert, and again, Nate Silver is a statistician who analyzes polls, he's not a pollster himself, were predicted that Hillary Clinton would win. And I remember just seeing ridiculous numbers for this, and she didn't. And I would also say that since 2016, 2020 polling was off, the midterm election polling was off, and the off-year election was off. Nothing has been accurate. It's been in the ballpark, but you know, the midterms were supposed to be this red wave that didn't happen. The off-year election was supposed to be much more favorable to Republicans than it actually was. So people don't answer their phones. People don't want to deal with polls. I don't. I turn them off. I don't answer anything. Text messages, emails, I don't answer anything. I got a phone call from one of the famous polls, and I just immediately blocked the number. So I'm just like, I don't know who you are. I don't want to deal with this. So I think, yeah, I don't know. I don't know if I put this much weight on polls, especially, again, Nate Silver working for a company owned by Peter Thiel backing J.D. Vance. Just put that, I'm not making any accusations, just putting those together. So next up, we have our hero, Jessica Tarlov, the liberal on the 5, defending Kamala Harris.
She did an interview last week. She sat down with Dana. Listen, the goalposts could not be moved any further. I understand this is something that aggravates the media because all we want to do is to have people accessible to us so we can constantly talk about them and scrutinize every single thing that they said. But this would carry a lot more weight if she hadn't just sat down with Dana Bash. She is doing debate prep. If you want to mock her for trying to be prepared for what could be the biggest night of her life, that's going to fall on, it's in bad taste, false ears. I don't know what the right saying is for it. Kamala Harris is running a campaign that is resonating with the American public. That's just a fact about it. She has moved so far ahead of where Joe Biden was, up 7-8 points in some of these states. She just pulled in $361 million in fundraising in August. That's triple what Trump brought in. And the most exciting part of that is that 1.3 million of those donors are new donors, people who haven't given in this cycle at all. And the stories that people are trying to pin on her, like the Washington Post did this deep dive into the turnover within her office, also citing the fact, by the way, that Mike Pence had 83% turnover in his office if you're using the same standards. But these quotes are ludicrous. Like someone who worked for her said, it's stressful to brief her because she read all the materials and annotated it and prepared to talk through it. God forbid the woman actually read the briefing book. And this all flies in the face of what people had said about her, that she was unprepared, that she was pissed at people for not prepping her. It was all about how she took this so seriously that she took it like a prosecutor would and was like, I'm not just going to do this because you told me to. I'm going to ask you why. And I have not met yet a real live Democrat who says, you know what I'm really mad about? That I don't see Kamala Harris all the time in big interviews. They're watching her at rallies. They're listening to what she had to say. They're high off the DNC 100%, and they're giving their money.
So Jessica Tarlov basically just spelled it all out. And I think there's a lot to be said about the small donor situation, because it's one thing to get it from big donors who are going to give to these parties regardless. It's another thing to get it from people who are giving like $40. That's a big deal because money shows enthusiasm better than a stupid poll where nobody answers their phone. But anyway, next up we have Wednesday. This one was a controversial clip of mine. I was snapping at people on Threads over this. I was like, people, if you won't take a source, I don't know what to tell you. This was, and I'll explain after I play the clip. This is from Wednesday from Jesse Watters Primetime.
They say blood's thicker than water, but Tim Walz's family in Nebraska, Won't be bleeding blue this November. His cousins put out this photo wearing Walz for Trump shirts. And Trump reposted it saying he looks forward to meeting them all soon. We have to be completely transparent. These are third cousins of the Walz guy. Does it still count?
Yeah, it does.
It does?
So the other voice that you just heard there was Julie Banderas. I believe she's a Fox Business host. I never see her unless she's a guest on Jesse Waters' show. She was just there to do this stupid bit with him. So this was a controversial clip for me because as soon as I posted it, two people on Threads just insisted that the image of, it was like 8 people standing in front of a house, it looked like, with these goofy navy blue shirts on that said, Waltzes for Trump. And they used punctuation improperly. They were saying Waltzes possessive. So Waltz apostrophe S for Trump, which is not plural for Waltz. Anyway, 2 people got really worked up with me on Threads and said, that's an AI image. How dare you? Basically. And I'm like, hello, you're talking to a fact checker. Give me a moment. And like, bam, 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 bam. Like 3-4 sources right off the bat, 30 seconds of articles explaining that, no, those were real people and they are incredibly distantly related to Tim Walz. And even after that, I kid you not, somebody was like, yeah, I still don't believe it. And I'm like, okay, so USA Today, Reuters, AP, that's Associated Press, they're all making up this story just to confuse you. And those people who do actually exist and they have names that are cited in the article, all of that is made up to prop up an AI image. Because just stop it already. Stop sounding like MAGA. Look, if I give you 3 sources, 3 that have specifics like that in them, trust the source. Stop it. Just stop it. You get muted that way. I mute people all the time. You have no idea how many people I mute. I'm just like, mute, 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 mute. One guy I chewed out last week because he was so annoying. He was so annoying. He was getting all persnickety about something. And I was like, if you expect a doctoral thesis in a tweet, my friend, I have 280 characters. Try writing these things. Anyway, just whew, whew. So yes, those people in that photo were second and third cousins of Tim Walz, and their last name, this is what's even funnier, is not even Walz. They're descendants of his grandfather's brother. No kidding. And they had different last names, and then I include the correct way to write Waltz plural from the Merriam-Webster's dictionary, and because Waltz ends in a Z, you add an ES. So waltzes would be an ES. If it ends in a Z or an S, ES. If it ends in any other letter, S. Yay, we learned something. So, I'm sorry. I got so worked up. I hate when people try to correct something that's not incorrect. You have no idea how hard I work and how many hours I work at this. So when somebody does something that I just 1000% know is right, and they're like, that's not right. That's not right. I'm going to just come down on you like a ton of bricks. Deal with it. So there was so much going on last week, and this is my personal favorite story. It was so insane. So last week, the Department of Justice issued a criminal indictment to 2 employees of a Russian state-controlled media outlet, which it said deployed nearly $10 million to publish content favorable to Russia using right-wing American influencers. The scheme involved a Tennessee-based media company that used well-known personalities Tim Pool, Dave Rubin, and Benny Johnson, as well as 3 others, to sow political division in the United States and weaken U.S. opposition to Russian interests. The social media personalities reportedly paid the outrageous sum of $400,000 a month to create content on YouTube. Jesse Waters thought the entire story was another hoax designed to smear Donald J. Trump, and on Wednesday on Jesse Waters' Primetime, he proudly declared that his program could pass for Russian propaganda. Here's the clip.
If you're wondering what this Russia disinformation looks like, here it is. If you see the following narratives on the internet, it could be Russian interference. Are you ready? Record inflation, unaffordable prices for food and essential goods, risk of job losses for white Americans, privileges for people of color, threat of crime coming from people of color and immigrants, overspending on foreign policy. The United States government wants us to believe that the Russians are using Republican talking points to interfere with the election. And if we see things online about DEI or migrant crime or even record inflation, it could be Russian propaganda. And anybody who emails this stuff around or says it on TV could be a Russian agent and should be under investigation. This show tonight has all the earmarks of Russian propaganda.
So this is how far down the rabbit hole right-wing media in this country has gone. When an overpaid stuffed shirt idiot like Jesse Waters proudly declares that he sounds like Russian disinformation and immediately disregards the Department of Justice investigation into a hostile foreign power. Vladimir Putin would kill every man, woman, and child in this country if he could get away with it, and he would dance on our graves. This is a man who throws people out of windows. He doesn't do it himself, but they fall out of windows. When they're flying in the air, their planes blow up. They drink radioactive tea. He's poisoned his enemies. This is a vicious, vicious human being who has no regard for human life and is cunning and horrible. And they're like, oh, we sound like Russian disinformation. Shut up. They invaded a sovereign nation. They invaded their neighbor and they don't even care. They're just slaughtering people, purposefully targeting civilians for the entirety of this war. Purposefully. Just don't even get me started. Oh my goodness. And you're like cheering it on. This is sick stuff. Fox is truly twisted. People wonder why I use humor in this podcast. Because I could, if I didn't, oh my goodness. But now we've got a fun shift. We do have a fun shift. This made me so ridiculously happy last week. Hunter Biden. The dream has died. The dream has died. They can't milk this anymore. They can't. He pleaded guilty to all of the tax charges he was facing last week. All of them. Just said, I'm done. I'm out. I'm cashing out. Let's do this. Pleading guilty. Now, he doesn't have any priors, and the gun charges that he was found guilty on are pretty minor. So who knows what's going to happen to him? Seriously doubt he's going to get 17. He also paid back the IRS. So all of these things are in his favor. He paid the IRS tons of money. He apologized for what he did. He admitted that he did something wrong. He pleaded guilty, saved the feds the trouble of the trial. You know, that always helps in your favor when you just say, that's it, I'm out. I'm tapping out. I did it. You got me. Things tend to go better for you in sentencing when you do that. So here's the clips of people on Fox freaking out that they can't milk this Hunter Biden story for, like, I don't know, as long as this trial happened. Here we go.
Either you pay your taxes or you don't, which is why, Steve, it's been shocking to me that he has not pled guilty up until this point.
His dad, on the last day in office in January, is going to pardon his son.
In a surprising move, after initially indicating he would plead not guilty to federal tax crimes, Hunter Biden has now entered a guilty plea. That was earlier today.
They lost. I mean, they by pleading guilty on the eve of the trial, you don't have much to trade away.
First of all, we have to understand that the crimes that Biden has pleaded guilty to are real crimes.
Fox News alert, Hunter Biden just pled guilty to all 9 counts in his federal tax trial. Hunter changed his plea to guilty for stiffing the IRS out of $1.5 million. He didn't pay his back taxes. The sugar brother, who's protected by the CIA, paid him.
So the only option for Hunter was to plead guilty to all counts. You don't need anyone's permission to plead guilty to all counts.
I'm going to ask a dumb question. Can Hunter Biden plead guilty today? The answer is yes, but I'm not a lawyer, so I asked the question, and then a few hours later he did. So that's
the Alford plea. Essentially, it's kind of pleading guilty while maintaining your innocence. I call it the I know what it looks like defense.
Hunter Biden pleads guilty to 9 tax charges, but will the president pardon him?
You have to plead guilty if you didn't pay your taxes, because either you did or you didn't. I mean, there's an easy paper trail for that.
Well, he's going to do not guilty.
I know, but why? Because either you pull out your tax returns, did you pay it or did you not? I mean, Now, do you think he'll actually spend time behind bars? Do you think his dad will pardon him, or maybe Kamala or Donald Trump?
So I should introduce this last voice in the montage because she's not a regular, she's like a regular contributor on Fox, but she's not like a voice that you hear a lot. This is Francy Hawks. She's a former federal prosecutor, and she sort of gives her lawyer's opinion of this case. Now, Jesse Waters threw in that bit about the CIA protecting the sugar brother. Okay, Jesse Waters, great, you go with that. And then the rest of it was just people basically saying, how dare he, plead guilty. They're all mad. And then the repetition, I actually cut that down. They had more than that. I could have done 3.5 minutes on Hunter Biden. What I did is I went through the transcripts and just searched for the word guilty. And that's how I put that together. They were that worked up. They also keep insisting that Biden is going to pardon Hunter, even though Biden said he wouldn't. There's a chance that Kamala Harris could. Who knows? I don't think he's going to get that long of a sentence anyway, based on the facts. But here is Francy Hawks' expert opinion on the situation.
I think he'll get pardoned. I think his dad will pardon him going out. I don't think there's any question about that. I don't think Hunter Biden is this brave, selfless person he's trying to portray by pleading guilty to save his family. If that's what he wanted to do, he could have done it years ago. He could have done it when the charges were lodged against him. He could have negotiated a plea with the government. He could have pled guilty during that ridiculously soft plea agreement that they offered him last year and he backed out of. So I think that he'll never see a day in jail. And I think that the timing of this was such that it protects his father in pardoning him after the election rather than before.
Really what the subtext is with all of those clips, and that's why I wanted to include so many of them. And again, I could have included far more than that. It's about half of what I found. Fox is really upset that they don't have content that they can milk. Because if this trial had happened, they would have dedicated a ridiculous time every single day to it. They would have overanalyzed it. They would have put it on Fox Nation. They would have had specials on Fox Nation dedicated to it, where they went over the same garbage over and over and over again and tried to make the laptop into this, huge, the cornucopia of crime. When in reality, it was just a lot of homemade porn. Hunter Biden with some very attractive women who were sex workers that, their faces are blurred out and whatnot. And then Hunter Biden doing a lot of crack on camera and doing incredibly cringeworthy, embarrassing confessionals to the camera while naked that, addicts who aren't in recovery will do. And it was sad and depressing and awful to watch. And I'm very, very happy that he's in recovery now. If you have had a relative or friend who's dealt with addiction, you know exactly what I'm talking about. It's like a different person. You're like, thank God you're out of that. You're out of that. You're out of that. Let's stay out of that. You could do it. You could do it. You're a superstar. Anybody in recovery listening to this right now, you are a superstar. But I mean that. I mean that 100%. But yeah. Yeah. The Hunter Biden saga is over. It's over! Okay, moving on. This one was a gem. This one I posted, and it blew up to 1 million without me even really noticing it on Twitter. And I was like, wow, this is crazy. So the clip is kind of self-explanatory. There was this apartment complex in Aurora, Colorado that people on Fox claimed was being overrun with the Venezuelan gang. And then there was a second story that you'll hear in a moment.
Kamala's open borders insanity is wreaking more havoc. Officials in Aurora, Colorado are setting up a task force after terrifying video emerged of a vicious apartment invasion, allegedly by a dangerous migrant gang.
Now, on Twitter, I noticed people posting articles about residents in the same apartment complex who were like, yeah, that's not what's happening. And so I Googled it, and I went on YouTube and started looking for clips. And then I hit the jackpot where I found the local Fox affiliate, so same company. This is just the local Fox news channel from the Denver area reporting on the story. And they sort of debunk what Jesse Waters just said.
Developing this morning, we're hearing the people living inside of one of those chaotic apartments in Aurora where the alleged gang activity is taking place. Neighbors telling us gangs are not the problem. They say poor management is the problem.
Yeah, so this all comes after we've showed you this concerning video, that video that you just saw of the what allegedly could be gangs going door to door there. Fox 31's Courtney Fromm, she's on it live in Aurora this morning. Now we're even hearing from the mayor who, is saying this is because of slumlords, not the gangs. So we're kind of hearing both sides of this.
Yeah, good morning to you both. And the neighbors who actually live in the Edge at Lowry Apartments, they actually had a rally yesterday to talk about all of this and say, hey, this is not what's going on. It's actually this building is kind of a mess and the management company is not taking care of it. And they're asking specifically to talk to the mayor, Mayor Mike Kaufman, I should say, here in Aurora. And it sounds like the mayor is on board to chit chat about what's going on. Now, Mayor Mike Kaufman says there have been conversations of an emergency order to take over the complex, but he says that's a last resort. Now, those who live there, they tell us they have had no issues with gang activity, but say the real crime is the horrible living conditions they've been dealing with, like the mountains of trash, bed bugs, and even mice. And they say all of this happening without any help from the property management company. Now, the management company, CB's management, also oversaw the Nome Street complex that was shut down last month. Now, the city shut down Nome Street because of code violations, but the management company says that they couldn't go in there and actually deal with the code violations because it was overrun by a Venezuelan gang. So that's all, everybody kind of pointing the finger at each other. But that location, like I said, allegedly also had gang activity. Now, the mayor, though, he says all of these allegations are a potential crutch for the company to be using.
So to me, I just look at it this way. Why would, in the images that I saw of the press conference, that the residents of this apartment complex decided to hold themselves, where there's about 40, 50 people, behind, a cheap plastic table, and these are just everyday, ordinary Americans, and they're saying, hey, yeah, it's not gangs, it's this horrible landlord. Please help us. They're, management company, horrible landlord. The corporation, I should say, is located out of state, and it sounds to me like this corporation is just trying to make as much money out of the building as possible, and they don't want to put any money into the building. And so they're using this excuse of Venezuelan gangs to not fix the building. And that's what it sounds like. Because I just don't know why 40, 50 people would all come together and say, oh, let's do this. I mean, this doesn't make any sense. And in New York, where property is worth just a ridiculous amount of money, these types of things happen all the time, where landlords will do all kinds of things to drive people crazy to get them out of the building so they can raise the rents. They do all sorts of things. I lived in a building in Washington Heights where we had to get our windows replaced because they were so bad that the state forced the landlord to do it. The city and the state forced the landlord to do it. They had to replace the wiring at one point. They had to replace, everything was by court decree. They never did anything on their own. We could complain about it. They wouldn't do it. You basically had to force their hand. I lived in a building in Flatbush where I cannot make this one up, my front door wouldn't lock properly. If I was in the apartment, you could lock it solid. But if I left the apartment, if you pushed on the door in a certain way, you could pop the door open because it wasn't hung properly. And I had to threaten to withhold my rent. I had to threaten my landlord to go to court. Just all this drama for them to fix it. So that is, I believe, the tenets on this one. Because it just doesn't make sense that they would hold a press conference. Why would they do that? It doesn't make any sense. If they really had gangs in the building, they would be like, yeah, we have gangs in the building. That's common sense. But anyway, next up, we've got, okay. So we are on the eve of 9/11. I was here during 9/11. It had a profound impact on my life. And so this is a clip, Steve Doocy. This is from, what day did he say this? Tuesday. And this was, I can count on my hand how many times I've screamed, stopped my computer, and had to walk away. Had to walk away from my laptop. This is one of them. I'll just play the clip. It's self-explanatory.
Well, Lawrence, after September 11th, we saw here in the New York City area, particularly over in New Jersey, there were reports of people celebrating after the planes flew into the buildings.
So you can see why I was upset by that, because that is a bold-faced lie. I don't know if Steve Doocy believes that nonsense, but part of the confusion is during the 2016 election cycle, Donald J. Trump ran around. He said this in 2015. There's a specific instance where he started saying this, that he saw thousands of Muslims celebrating in Jersey City specifically, which is right across the river from New York City. They were celebrating the destruction of the World Trade Center. That is not true. That did not happen. Trump has also said that on the morning of 9/11, he was in his apartment in Manhattan, which would be in Midtown, which is nowhere near 9/11, because that's at the very southern tip of that. The World Trade Center was at the very southern portion of Manhattan, so he would be nowhere near it. And it did not appear on television. There's no footage that exists of thousands of Muslims celebrating in Jersey City. If you want to see Muslims celebrating 9/11, you'd have to look at footage from the Middle East, which I don't think is that surprising. So, but there was nobody in New Jersey. And I, in fact, and this is why I get so mad about this, there were people in Paterson, New Jersey. There was a group that was so terrified of being accused of being terrorists that they put a banner on their city's main street that said, "The Muslim community does not support terrorism." And in my neighborhood overnight in Brooklyn, there were American flags pretty much in every single window of Muslim-owned businesses and signs of support. And that area, which is not that far from where I live now, was so affected by 9/11 that, you know, everybody in New York pretty much kind of was, because people knew people who worked at the towers, people knew people who were affected. I had just moved here. I'd only lived here for 5 months. And my neighborhood had like a very thin, almost like a microscopic layer of dust from the towers. You could look out and all the cars had this light gray layer on top of them. Very thin, very thin. But that was from the towers. We had it in my window. My bathroom window faced that part of Manhattan, and I could scrape it off with my finger. I felt it in my fingertips. It was gritty. And I was like, oh my, I couldn't believe what I experienced. And the entire city was in mourning. And where I get very angry about this, and why I think Donald J. Trump is such a dangerous, dangerous human being, is he made up that story, I don't know why, for bravado, to make him sound like these evil Muslims or whatever. But after 9/11, there were numerous instances of hate crimes against Muslim individuals. Some men were killed for just existing. People got mad and they attacked them. In some cases, the men weren't even Muslim. They were Sikh, which is a religion from India, and people mistook them because they have turbans, and they said, oh, you're Muslim, and they were beaten up or killed. So this is serious. When you demonize an entire group of people like that, just pure evil. This man is so, so dangerous. This next clip is related to that clip, and this is where this kind of came from. And this is, I hate to end this podcast on kind of a dark tone, but there's no way. I had to include this because I think it's very important. So Fox News does a terrible job covering the Israel-Hamas conflict. Terrible job. After October 7th, at first, the network was all on board with like very pro-Israel, rah-rah. Okay. However you feel about it, that's how they took the stance. Then they decided they were bored with it pretty early on and just kind of dropped it. I've compared PBS to Fox this entire time. PBS has included more family members of hostages than Fox has, and PBS doesn't take a stance. PBS tries desperately to stay straight down the middle and not take a stance on this conflict. But yet they've featured more relatives of hostage members than Fox has. Fox has ignored stories where they found the bodies of hostages, just completely ignored it, at least on the shows I watch. The only show that even covers the conflict at this point, really, that I watch is Fox and Friends. The primetime shows might mention it in passing. The Five never talks about it. So last week, 6 Israeli hostages were murdered right before they were liberated, basically, in this horrific, horrific situation. Because they're so close, and then they basically executed them. And Israel, the people of Israel, reacted with massive, massive protests. They're still having protests and a general strike. Now, I couldn't play these clips for you because this is an audio podcast and this is a visual thing, so I'll describe it as best I can. Fox opened, I did a clip last week where I compared a minute of how Fox covered these protests with a minute of how PBS covered these protests. Fox was like this jumbled mess of a segment where they were jumping around, and they showed a small group of people that was maybe like 200 people, and they said, oh, there's protests in Israel, and they showed just this tiny clip. And then they referred to the strike as a labor strike. It wasn't a labor strike. It was a general strike, meaning everybody, as many people as possible just didn't go to work. They shut down the airport briefly. They shut down highways briefly. And then PBS showed the same story. PBS showed a drone shot, an aerial shot that showed massive, all of Tel Aviv just packed with people. And these people were protesting their own government because they're fed up. And they're like, we just stop this. It's not working. We want our hostages back. Fox pretends that Bibi Netanyahu is beloved, which is nonsense because he wasn't even popular before October 7th. His poll numbers are abysmal because many Israelis blame him for October 7th. I'm not putting my own opinion on this. This is just based on everything I've picked up from this conflict. I have hyperlinks to back up what I'm saying in the newsletter. So Fox doing this terrible job of covering this war, which they've done. They don't show Palestinians at all. Never. Very rarely do they even show a Palestinian on the screen, much less any of the damage, much less like a child that's been killed or, anything like that. They never show anything like that because they just show this completely warped version. They had a man on, and I think he did just a phenomenal job. I don't know how he can hold it in considering his position. So they had Jonathan Decoding, an American Israeli, whose son is believed to be a hostage held by Hamas. And this is how he basically schooled Pete Hegseth, who just sat there the entire time with his jaw dropped. He had nothing to say about what's really going on in Israel.
Well, thank you for having me. First, a small correction. There are actually 7 U.S. citizens still being held by Hamas as hostages. 4 we hope are still alive, and 3 their murders have already been confirmed. As far as messaging to the Israeli government, my government, it's that the time is over for sort of perpetuating this fantasy of total victory over Hamas. Based on the sacrifice of our sons, daughters, grandparents who are hostages in Gaza. We've been at this for 11 months, hearing from our government that, a little more military pressure and a little bit more military pressure is going to cause Hamas to come begging for an agreement and an exchange of our hostages. Clearly that has not happened. 6 bodies were returned yesterday of hostages who were alive until this past week. A week before that, 6 other hostages were returned after their murder in months and months after October 6th. And so it is absolutely clear the only way to get hostages home alive is by some kind of negotiated agreement with Satan, keeping in mind that all of Israel's military and intelligence senior command have been saying for weeks, if not months, that the fighting needs to stop in order to get the hostages back, as many as possible alive, but all of the 101 hostages still remaining.
Now, I just want to clarify that that statement is that man's opinion and his opinion alone. He speaks for himself. He can only speak for himself, just like all of us can only speak for ourselves. To clarify. I also want to say that, yes, of course, there are people who adore Bibi Netanyahu in Israel to support everything he's doing. Of course. What I found amazing about that clip, though, is that is not a narrative that Fox wants to get out. And this guest just kind of said it on his own, and they had nothing to say to him. Pete Hegseth just sat there. He had no idea what to do. He also, later on in the segment, the same man praised the Biden administration, which, of course, Fox doesn't want that on their airwaves either. But that happened. So, yeah, Fox just has done such a terrible, terrible job of covering this conflict. If anybody watching Fox would have no idea what's going on over there, they've reduced most of their segments to brief, like, oh, Hezbollah is shooting at northern Israel again. Well, yes, and that's it. And they don't talk about anything. They don't include any information. You'd just be completely, you'd have no idea what was going on. They completely ignore Ukraine, too, by the way. And Sudan, what's that? They don't talk about the civil war in Sudan. Oh, my goodness. But, you know, if we can talk about Kamala Harris banning plastic straws, then we're going to use 20 minutes on that. So moving on to stories Fox News ignored, which is also another element of propaganda. It's what they don't say. Every week I compare the hours I've watched on Fox News to 5 hours of the PBS NewsHour. The following list are stories that PBS covered that Fox News did not. And I had to truncate the list again due to space. Here we go. Climate disasters. The city of Phoenix, Arizona, hit a new record last week as temperatures hit 100 degrees Fahrenheit for 100 days in a row. The last record of 76 days was set in 1993. This summer was the hottest summer on record across the planet. Updates in the Israel-Hamas war. PBS produced a segment on how children in Israel-Palestine are going back to school during wartime. The network interviewed families in northern Israel who have been displaced due to shelling from Hezbollah. PBS also featured a second segment of equal length about how children in Gaza are being educated in tents as nearly all of the schools in the region have been damaged or destroyed from Israeli airstrikes. Some of the intact schools have been converted to shelters for families who have lost their homes in the war. The U.S. called on Israel to investigate the death of a Turkish-American citizen who was killed during an anti-settlement protest in the occupied West Bank. A 26-year-old woman was fatally shot in the head by IDF forces. Witnesses say she did not pose a threat to Israeli forces. The World Health Organization, WHO, reported that its plans to vaccinate children in Gaza for polio are going better than expected. Updates in the war in Ukraine. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky accepted the resignation of Ukraine's foreign minister. 4 other cabinet members have also resigned. Zelensky indicated last week that a reshuffle was imminent, with the war poised to enter a critical stage as its 1,000-day mark looms in November. A Russian missile strike on the city of Lviv near the border with Poland killed 7 people. The attack prompted NATO member Poland to scramble fighter jets to the Ukrainian border area. The U.S. committed another $250 million for weapons for Ukraine so it can defend itself against Russian attacks. Zelensky asked top U.S. military officials for permission to hit targets deeper inside Russia. The Justice Department today announced the seizure of a Dassault Falcon 900EX aircraft owned and operated for the benefit of Nicolas Maduro Moros and persons affiliated with him in Venezuela. The aircraft was seized in the Dominican Republic and transferred to the Southern District of Florida at the request of the United States based on violations of U.S. export control and sanction laws. Last week, hotel workers in Baltimore joined a massive nationwide hotel strike formed by Unite Here against Hilton, Hyatt, and Marriott. More than 10,000 workers around the country went on strike for better pay and working conditions. PBS continued its coverage of the civil war in Sudan. International aid groups issued a joint declaration that the hunger crisis in Sudan is of historic proportions. Shopkeepers and school teachers have been deputized by the Sudanese military to help protect villages from the marauding Rapid Support Forces. At least 12 died, mostly women and children, after a boat carrying migrants capsized in the English Channel. The disaster is the greatest loss of life in the Channel this year. Most of the migrants were from Eritrea, a country in northeast Africa. A Venezuelan judge issued an arrest warrant for the opposition's former presidential candidate, Humando Gonzalez. The U.S. and other countries have declared Gonzalez the winner of the last election, as the ruling party and President Maduro have yet to offer up any evidence that they won. The activist group Human Rights Watch found links to the Venezuelan government and the violent crackdown on protesters, bystanders, opposition leaders, and critics following the July 28th election. At least 100 were killed in northeastern Nigeria when Boko Haram Islamic extremists opened fire on a market. More than 50 extremists drove in on motorcycles and started firing indiscriminately into places of worship and homes before setting buildings ablaze. Secretary of State Antony Blinken visited Haiti to meet with Prime Minister Kanyel, the Transitional Presidential Council, and other political and security leaders to advance a shared commitment to a secure and democratic Haiti. The Department of Justice charged Dimitri Sims, a former advisor to Trump's 2016 presidential campaign, for work he did for a sanctioned Russian TV network. Rebecca Cheptegei, a 33-year-old Ugandan Olympic marathon runner, has died after being attacked by her former boyfriend. The man doused her in petrol and set her on fire after an argument over a piece of land. The Republic of Congo received a first delivery of 99,000 vaccines for Mpox after a massive outbreak of the virus. Jean Kaseya, Director General of the African Centers for Disease Control, has said the continent now needs some 10 million doses to stop the spread of the virus. China will no longer allow international adoptions. At least 150,000 Chinese children have been adopted abroad in the last 3 decades. Hundreds of families who were in the process of adopting Chinese children are now in limbo. Sergio Menendez, a Brazilian musician, died at the age of 83 after a career that spanned 60 years and produced over 35 albums. Menendez helped popularize bossa nova globally. Linda Deutsch, a special correspondent for the Associated Press, died at the age of 80. Deutsch's career spanned 50 years, where she had a front row seat to some of the most famous criminal and civil trials from Charles Manson, O.J. Simpson, Michael Jackson, among others. Those are all the stories. Now, by the numbers, notice how Fox didn't mention that person getting arrested who worked on the 2016 Trump campaign. They didn't. Okay. Every week I compare the top 5 topics on Fox to the top 5 topics on PBS. Here we go. Fox. Kamala bashing, 23%. Trump, 2024, where they just blatantly shill for the candidate, 19%. Influencers indicted with colluding with Russians, that was only 6%. Hunter Biden trial, 5%. And the Israel-Hamas war, 5%. And that was all 100% on Fox and Friends. PBS NewsHour, top 5 topics for the week ending September 8th, 2024. Number 1, Harris versus Trump, so the presidential race, 13%. Israel-Hamas war, 9%. Author profile, people talking about books, 8%. Sudan civil war, 7%. And that Russian influencer campaign, 6%. Words used on Fox for the week ending September 8th, 2024. Trump, 443. Kamala, 376. Biden, 316. They're still talking about him. Israel, 130. Border, 99. Hunter, 82. Fracking, 57. Economy, 56. Israel, 52. Shooting, 50. Polls, 46. Inflation, 36. China, 34. McDonald's, 23. Flip-flop, 17. Palestinian, 9. Plastic straws, 6. And AOC, 1. So the presidential debate is about to start in an hour. And I will be covering that both on PBS and Fox. I will be putting out a podcast or newsletter, depending on how that goes. We'll see how it goes as soon as humanly possible. If you'd like to check out my work on Twitter, you can go to X, also known as Twitter. I'm saying Threads, YouTube, Instagram, TikTok, Blue Sky, which is going to have video soon, and YouTube. You can also check out a version of this podcast on the Resolute Square YouTube channel. And if you'd like to become a paid subscriber to Decoding Fox News, I could always use you. You can go to Substack for Decoding Fox News, Patreon for Decoding Fox News. All paid subscribers and paid supporters get exclusive content. This week it's going to be Chapter 6 and 7 of Project 2025, an analysis. That's halfway done. It should be coming soon. And my podcast mascots, Odin and Thor, send their love. I will see you at the next podcast. So I realized I didn't do one of my goofy impressions in this episode, so I'm doing it now very quickly. I just had a lot to cram in this week. There's so much going on. Very quickly, I just want to say this to everybody. I'm Carrie Lake, and you better watch that presidential debate tonight, and you better cheer on my man, my dude, my guy, Donald J. Trump, because I look into his eyes and I see the future, because I am the governor, I am the senator, and I am Mrs. Trump. Melania, watch your back. Watch your back, Melania.
Resolute Square.